Charles Séguin, il n'est pas là. On est les deux responsables et on travaille pour Luc. Maintenant, Intel était très gentil de nous aider avec Red Hat Day. Phil Vokins, c'est le country manager chez Intel et lui maintenant, il va nous parler un peu d'Intel et comment Intel joue dans le nouveau monde de TI.
Alors, bonjour tout le monde. Comme Claude a dit, moi je suis Phil Vokins d'Intel. Je vous remercie beaucoup pour votre temps aujourd'hui. Puis-je commencer avec une petite requête en effet. Probablement vous avez déjà découvert que je ne viens pas de Québec. Je suis anglais, je viens de Londres en effet. Et j'ai appris le français à l'école, mais il y a 30 ans, plus que 30 ans maintenant. C'était en effet 1985 que j'ai quitté l'école. Alors, j'en suis sûr, je n'arrive pas à présenter tout ce que je veux en français. Alors, j'espère que ça ne vous dérange pas si je vous parle un peu en anglais. Est-ce que ça va aller? Oh, merci. I've got time for a story, and I know it's after lunch, so I'll do that first, actually. So that's all true, by the way. I did study French right through high school until I left in 1985. And I was reminded recently of why I must take it up again. So I'm in the US, I'm sitting in a hotel room, and I'm scrolling the BBC website for news because I'm sure you appreciate when you go to the US that Fox News is not always the most reliable source for international affairs and what's really going on in the world. So I was looking at the BBC website, and for some reason I scrolled down to the culture page, and there was an article in there about different expressions from around the world. And these are the expressions which mean a lot to the people who are saying them in their own language, but as soon as you translate them into anything else, they mean nothing at all. They make no sense. And they had 11 of them. I don't know why they had 11, but there were 11. So the first, for example, would have been from Poland, and the expression was, "Not my peanuts, not my monkeys," which essentially means, hey, that problem's got nothing to do with me. But to the point of French, of these 11, 4 were in French, which I think is a testament to the imagery of the French language. And the last one kind of really stuck with me. And it was this. It was, "Il pète plus haut que son cul." And if ever there was a demonstration of why a language has more imagery and richness than any other language, that's it. And that's personally why I will resolve to continue my French learning. And maybe next time I come back, I'll be able to do a little bit more than that. So, we were asked by our friends at Red Hat to give a short talk on what's happening in the world from a technology perspective and why that matters. So that's what I'm going to try and do for the next 25 minutes or so. Now, many of you may not have heard from Intel for a little while. So in case you're wondering, this is not the microarchitecture session, okay? And the reason for that is that although what we've achieved at Intel from an engineering perspective is seriously very impressive, we pushed through 14 nanometer process technology, we're actually launching 10 later this year, most of our customers don't actually really care about that stuff. They already trust it from us. What they do expect to hear is where the world is going, how it's changing, and what that means for their business, their industry, and their competitors and peers. So that's what we're going to be focusing on. And at Intel, we actually spend a lot more time than most organizations thinking about this. And we have to, because we have a very capital-intensive manufacturing process. We set our company strategy years, even decades out. And of course, you can make changes to that strategy, but it can also be quite expensive to do so. So we're living in a period of unprecedented change. No surprises there. That's not news to you. But what we'd argue is that the nature of the change is very different from what we've experienced before, and the pace of change is very different from what we've experienced before. And many of our enterprise customers who've informed this view will share that opinion. Digital transformations, a kind of really interesting one. I was having a conversation at lunch with somebody about buzzwords. I'm not a fan of buzzwords. 5 years ago, you never heard about digital transformation. Now it's on every CIO agenda and most CEO agendas. By the way, I'm a man who likes simplicity, and having read a fair bit about this, I've decided I'm going to land on the Sloan, as in the Sloan Business School definition, which is simply this: the use of technology to rapidly improve performance. And you can see a bunch of other stats up there which will support this. I can give you more which are not on the slide. 45% of the Fortune 500 10 years ago, no longer on that list. The average age of a company used to be 60, today it's 12. 40% of jobs in North America will disappear by the year 2033. Hold that thought for a second, because I'm going to come back to it. And it might be tempting to think that this period of change, this period of turbulence that we're going through is a whirlwind and it'll all settle down and we'll get back into a new norm. We don't believe that's the case at all. In fact, we believe at Intel that this is the least amount of change we will ever see. We've got this phrase, which is, if the internet were a movie, we'd still be in the opening credits. And I think it's useful to point out what some of those contributing factors are. Here you'll see a list of technologies which make all this happen. I'm certainly not going to go into each in depth, but any single one of these, even by itself, has the ability to transform a company or transform an industry. We're making big strategic bets at Intel on 5G. 5G is not just the next G. It's a completely reimagined network to cope with the bandwidth and latency demands which we're going to be facing in the future as we enter this world of the Internet of Things. Smart machines and cognitive systems. I asked you to hold the thought a moment ago about the jobs disappearing in North America. In fact, it's true across the world. And as a personal example, I'm a father of 2 boys, and I guess many of you in this room are also parents. And it gets really quite scary, because if we know that 40% of jobs are going to disappear in the next 16 years, which is when our current generation of SKs and grade 1s will be graduating from college, well, jobs have always been replaced by technology. In fact, going back to the Industrial Revolution in the 1700s, it's not new. But this is different. Because of cognitive machines, machine learning and software, it's actually knowledge workers' jobs who are being replaced. So our old answer of saying, well, we'll protect our kids against that by sending them through college and getting them a good degree and they'll be okay, no longer applies. So you've got the CEO of State Street Bank saying that, well, he can replace 20%, he will replace 20% of his financial systems traders within the next 3 years because an algorithm can do it better. And he's probably right. Now, I don't want to depress you all and send you back to your kids to figure out what you're going to do next. The silver lining here is that as jobs have been replaced through history, they've always been replaced by new jobs, but at the time that happens, we can't predict what they're going to be. So we don't know what jobs are going to exist in 20 years' time, but we hope there's plenty of them. But I'll tell you this, that the kids who are tech savvy, who can code, who are not scared of a mobile application development, will probably be in a far better position to cope with that world than those who can't. So that's what my kids are doing. Okay, so anyway, back to what we're talking about. That was just a small aside there. So we see digital disruption, and it's in every single industry. This is not just about the Netflix or the Uber conversation. Every sector, and you've got this fusion of physical, digital, and sometimes biological systems, which you might have thought was kind of rather far-fetched a couple of years ago, but it's happening in non-traditional digital industries. So smart agriculture, you see on the left there. John Deere is a flagship Intel customer, very large Intel customer. So I guess you all know John Deere. They're the guys who make tractors and farm machinery, right? How about them being a cloud and data services company? They're putting sensors into nearly all their equipment. They can plant seeds to the perfect depth depending on the soil type in which they're planting in order to optimize crop returns. They have autonomous guidance on 120-foot wide machines, again, which can operate to within 1 inch of inch of accuracy for exactly that same reason. And they're also running huge analytics. They're a large Hadoop user on comparing future markets to predict the profitability of certain crops. So there are companies there who are, say, not those you would associate with being digitally transformed, which are doing kind of really great things in that sector. Healthcare is a great example, and this isn't just about fitness trackers so that we can release patients who we would normally have kept in for observation. We've already performed a number of soft tissue surgeries with autonomous robots. In fact, we believe now that 60% of surgery operations could be done completely unassisted, with the remaining 40% being able to be done with robots, but with some human guidance. So this is happening across every sector. And one of the results of all this bit of transformation is that companies are getting squeezed. They're getting squeezed by traditional competitors who are doing stuff better than they can do, perhaps with better process technology, perhaps producing the product more cheaply or adding value to it in some way. A great example of that would be the car sector. Premium manufacturers like the Germans, for instance, or the luxury Japanese brands now being squeezed by competitors from the Far East who are offering similar product quality, arguably without the brands, but the actual build quality is pretty much the same, and lifetime warranties are not unheard of. And then, of course, you've got the new disruptive businesses, the ones that you didn't see coming, and poster children for that would, of course, be Uber, Netflix, Airbnb, and so on, who are kind of radically changing the industries in which they enter. In my private role at Intel, I was originally hired as a big data and analytics guy, and I had the great opportunity to spend quite a bit of time down in Detroit with the car manufacturers. And I had an aha moment a few years ago as I was lucky enough to spend some time with one of the executives at Ford. And he said, "We're not worried about Japanese competition. We're worried about software companies. They're the ones who really threaten our business." And if you look at Uber, for instance, Uber isn't about taking taxi cabs off the road. Uber is about taking 400,000 cars off the road in the next 5 years. But he also mentioned Google, because the worry there is that if the software companies add the real value to the car, the product that you're driving, they're worried about being commoditized underneath that and not mattering quite so much more as a brand. So traditional, new disruptive businesses disrupting traditional ones in ways that we probably wouldn't have imagined a few years ago. And so a point that bears repeating is that some of the competition that you'll have is ones that you didn't see coming. And obviously we can all talk about Uber and those kind of poster children for that. But what about Astalift Cosmetics? I'll give you a lesser known one. Astalift was a brand of cosmetics which was released a few years ago now by Fujifilm in Japan. Yeah, Fujifilm, the camera company. And if some of you are of a similar generation to me, you will remember the days of before digital photography, of having to take your camera into a darkened room to take the film out. The reason for that is that collagen's present in camera film, and so you couldn't expose it to light, and also collagen is present in human skin. So what Fujifilm did was they realized what was happening to their traditional film sector and that people would not be buying those 35 millimeter rolls anymore, and they'd all be taking pictures on phones or some other digital media, and said, we can apply this to cosmetics. So they launched a brand called Astalift. Within 6 months, it was in 2,000 stores and generating around about $100 million worth of revenue. The point here is, how many cosmetics companies like L'Oreal saw Fujifilm coming on their radar in their rearview mirror as a large competitor? So it's coming from everywhere. So what we see is companies reinventing themselves, and they're also reinventing how they measure themselves. So traditionally, of course, it's been about the bottom line, economic success. And this concept of the triple bottom line, where you also take into account social and environmental issues, is not new. This was first proposed in the Harvard Business Review back in, I think, 1994. It's quite a well-established concept now. But the point is that companies are evaluating themselves, but crucially being evaluated by others on other factors than just their profitability. So well-informed consumers in a burgeoning middle class with lots more millennials having high disposable income are likely to choose products from a company which does not have an appalling safety record or which is not seen to be, potentially damaging to the environment. So companies really having to pay a lot of attention to this and measuring themselves in different ways, because social and environmental policies or social responsibility will also actually drive profits, as I will come back to. And we see companies as well operating in these three particular areas. So the sharing economy, lots talked about, again, Uber and Airbnb. I'll give you one which is closer to home. The sharing economy probably affects every single one of us in this room, myself included. Public cloud, okay? The likes of AWS, Azure coming along saying, we can do that cheaper. I know that's debatable, but that's what they'll say. They'll say, we can do it more efficiently. And I guarantee you, actually, they can do it more efficiently, certainly, than traditional IT, where development people might have had to wait 13 weeks to stand up an application on infrastructure. So shared cloud, shared infrastructure really affecting all of us. And clearly that's a common theme with our great friends at Red Hat here today, who are able to try and provide the same sort of agility on-premise to give customers a choice. Co-creation is a really interesting one. Companies who've gone out to their consumer base and said, we value your input. Lego's a really good example there. If anyone's got kids who do Lego, they have a creators forum. So consumers of Lego and kids can now propose the next Lego designs on a collaborative platform. And then other consumers can vote on it, and the company will then productize what they go back to market with, really building a very, very loyal customer base. But if you're going to do that, you need the right digital collaboration platforms in which to receive the communication in the first place, but also to communicate back, which ties very nicely to my kind of point on infrastructure. Prosumers, those organizations, or those people rather, who might, for instance, create their own energy and feed it back to the grid. So obviously they're getting some benefit from it themselves. They're getting cheaper energy and the spare capacity going back to the grid. And Tesla's Powerwall would be a good example of that in action. And then the experience economy is really about taking commodities and pushing them up the value chain towards experiences. So Starbucks might be a really good modern example of how that's happened. You've got coffee beans, which are a commodity. Then you've got ground coffee, which is a good. You've got the brewed coffee, which is the service. But then you've got the whole experience of going to an artisan coffee shop. Maybe you see people in Starbucks in my city, which is Toronto, and also here, lined up on their MacBooks, all looking good in Starbucks because they can afford $5 on a coffee. But by the way, I've got nothing against Starbucks. I've had 2 this morning, and I've got nothing against MacBooks because they're all Intel goodness inside. But very much a lifestyle thing, sitting in Starbucks there, with your expensive coffee and your MacBook doing whatever you're doing. So Starbucks, also, by the way, a great digital innovator too in that particular organization. And when we look at these kind of great innovative companies, there's 3 traits they have in order to get this agility they need to be able to respond as quickly as they do. Firstly, you've got to have the right culture in place. And the only point I'll make about culture is it can't really come from the bottom up. It has to be led by the executives. It has to be led from the top. Otherwise, it just becomes good ideas which die. So we need an executive management, whatever industry we're in, which is going to create a culture of innovation. Modern infrastructure, to my point on Red Hat and all of those companies which are working out there to provide agile IT so we can respond more quickly. If you have a culture which says we're going to make data-driven decisions, better give the employees the tools in order to make them and the infrastructure to do it. Similarly, smarter people and places. Again, if you're going to have a collaborative culture, you better have the right collaborative systems in place so that people can actually work together. Probably everyone in this room, myself included, has had the experience of sitting in a presentation which took way too long to get started because somebody's fumbling around under a conference room table looking for a VGA adapter or whatever fits the particular machine they're presenting from. Those days are gone. We can't live with those anymore. To the point on the triple bottom line, yes, the CSR agenda does have positive impacts. I talked a few minutes ago about looking outwards to our customer base and what our customers will decide upon. Also need to look inwards with our employee base. plenty of examples. Millennials will, 50% of millennials in the US will refuse to work for a company they see as socially irresponsible. 60% would take a pay cut to work for a company which is of their own values. By the way, another aside, because I know it's after lunch, everyone at Intel is required to have areas of subject matter expertise. Mine happens to be this, happens to be employee engagement. I did 2 master's degrees, actually. I did one in HR 15 years ago, and an MBA more recently than that, and both of my theses focused on this particular subject, on employee engagement. We hear about millennials all the time. You know, millennials carry a sense of entitlement. Millennials, you hire one and they think they should be running the company in 6 months. Does anybody know what a millennial actually is by definition? Because we hear about it all the time. Anyone care to hazard a guess at what millennial actually is? There are some of you in the room, and I apologize, I did not mean to insult you just now. So anyway, so you hear of Generation X, which is my generation. Prior to that, we had baby boomers. Then post-Generation X, we have Generation Y. So Generation Y was 1982 to 2004, and Generation Z, which follows. Millennial is applied to the term Generation Y because somebody realized in marketing that those born in 1982 would be the ones who turned 18 in the year 2000. So next time you hear millennials, you'll kind of know what they are. The oldest of them are now 35, and the youngest are 13 years old. So anyway, again, I digress, but I know that you'll bear with me because it's after lunch. So yeah, looking inwards to looking after our employees, very sound strategy. Target has had some great success in the US distributing fitness trackers to employees. Our friends at IBM delivered 40,000 fitness trackers to their employees over a period and saw a 96% usage rate. So if you are a business which relies on creative talent in order to succeed, pretty smart things to do there, looking inwards at your culture and taking care of the employee base. And the last point on sustainability is the notion of the circular economy. And again, this is great because it gives us the opportunity not to focus on those poster children of Netflix and Uber, but on different industries. Michelin truck tires, who realized that if they were to recycle truck tires, they could actually make more money than the old method of produce, use, dispose. And the way that they did that was they put sensors in their tires, and they've been actively taking over fleet management for whole fleets of vehicles now and taking them in. So they actually, not only do they recycle, but they guarantee the future business because they're actually managing the asset on a continuous life cycle. Also happens closer to home in our industry. One of the biggest growing sectors in IT in Canada and North America is PC as a service. Now, a company recently put this to me, and I had lunch with them, and my heart kind of sank. He said, I want to talk to you about refurbishing PCs, which is a big business in Quebec. And of course, from an Intel perspective, now, traditionally, we don't want people to refurbish PCs, we just want them to buy new ones. But of course, what they're actually doing is they're refurbishing, they're distributing to companies who couldn't normally afford a new piece, it could be a charity or a school, to my point on the requirement for tech education, and then pushing in new ones. But if you manage that as a provider, PC as a service, you're kind of guaranteeing that revenue flow for you as you go forward, but you're also doing good for the environment. So the circular economy, really big one. It's a McKinsey study, by the way, which says that they think they could save $1 trillion each year by 2025 just by having a cradle-to-cradle philosophy. So in a world which is really moving very, very quickly, the biggest mistake is to stand still and do nothing. We live in this era now of digital Darwinism, and nobody is too big to fail. And actually, when we talk about disruption, I would argue that Intel for the last few years has squarely been in the category, despite our engineering leadership, squarely in the category of being disrupted. And you see a lot of announcement from us on the direction of our business, so it's not like, I'm not preaching to you here. I think it really affects all of us. So yeah, the risk of doing nothing is a big mistake that we can make. We have to embrace innovation, we have to embrace digital change and seize it, and be prepared to fail fast. So, as we've gone through this, we've realized that all of those poster children we talk about, all of those great businesses are really good at 6 things. And these are the 6 things. I'm not going to go into each in any depth by any means, but being data-driven, well, spoken a bit about that already, making decisions which are based on data. This is not a big data argument, by the way. This world is data-rich, not data-poor, and drive density is such now that we can actually afford to store a lot of data much more cheaply than we ever could in the past. The problem is not storing the data, it's not big data, it's getting value from it and having that data-driven culture. Smart world really about asset optimization. Trusted cloud, which I want to finish off on in a minute, sorry. On demand, which I want to finish off on in a second. This is really about putting cloud at the center of your strategy, both off-prem and on-prem, and having a strategic approach to how we do that, which I will come back to. And certainly I say that in keeping with what the Red Hat guys are talking about today. Trusted is a particularly obvious one, and I've got Mike following me, given the daily security breaches that we hear about. Connected experience is really about the whole IoT story, and depending which projection you listen to, some 50 billion devices by the year 2020. And an innovative workforce, which I know I've already spoken about, which is this whole thing about creating, hiring the right people and then retaining the right people. So what I thought I would do to finish up is share with you an Intel Cloud Decision Guide. So Intel's own IT is a showcase to customers of what's achievable out there in the world. In fact, they go out on tour to our enterprise customers and talk about what they're doing with IT. Huge Red Hat customers here, incidentally. I know Luke will be delighted to hear. And we've also embraced the public cloud. And what they did was they came up with this cloud decision guide, which I'm allowed to share with you publicly, which elucidates what they will say is a good candidate for the public cloud and what they say is a good candidate for the private cloud, which they want to keep out on-prem, and they put it in a matrix format. And basically what they're saying is, well, how much control do we want over that? And that would obviously be a logical determinant about whether or not you put it in the public cloud or whether or not you want to put it in closely guarded on-prem. How variable, how bursty is it? Clearly applications or workloads like that are going to be candidates for coming in and out of a hybrid cloud, and so on and so on. So I thought I'd share that with you just in closing about how Intel IT is approaching this world of hybrid cloud, on-prem, off-prem, and say we believe it firmly in both, that the modern enterprise is going to go in both of those particular directions. So closing remarks, and this is kind of the challenger piece. So based on what we've been saying, you challenge yourselves, or if appropriate, challenge your executives and say, what are we doing differently? Given this pace of change in the world, how far have we come in the last 12 months? Are we talking about it? Are we paying lip service to it? Or are we actually embracing digital change? Are we shifting in terms of what we're doing, our processes towards more digital models? Typically, I'll say from personal experience, working with customers, the biggest inhibitors are very often political ones, not technical ones. The technology exists there today to do this sort of stuff. It's whether or not we can get an executive sponsor who has really real power, who's prepared to stand up behind this and make it happen. To my point on who is leading the charge. If this comes from the IT shop with all its substantive expertise, but it comes from the IT shop only, it has a much higher propensity to fail than if we can get some sort of business or executive sponsorship on top of it. Anyway, you've listened to my foreign language enough now, and I thank you for that, and thank you, by the way, for agreeing to listen to me in English. I'm going to hand back to Luke, who's going to introduce the next section. Thank you.
History, I can stay here, Phil, for a few minutes. A little history about Intel. In 1995, Intel was one of the first companies that invested money in Red Hat. For those of you that haven't had a chance to read the book that Bob Young wrote way back in the days, you can buy it for 1 penny, I believe, on the website. So you can read the story about how Intel was so close with Red Hat. And still today, we get the first chips from the manufacturing, some of the early stage chips to make sure we have certification and so forth. So we had a really long standing relationship with Intel for many years. And thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you, Luke.
Thank you.